What's up, guys? My name is Kein, and we're back today with more Scrap Mechanic, and today we're going to talk about torque, horsepower, and how that applies to piston-powered engines, and we're going to measure all of that with this amazing dyno. This is a dyno built by Kein, Anderer, and Ben Bingo. It's a ridiculously cool dyno, and it started out because I was like, you know what, we need to design a better, torquier engine, and in order to do that, we're gonna have to spend some time in creative mode, not in challenge mode, and in order to really understand how our engines are performing, we're gonna need to measure RPM and the amount of power that it can generate. So how fast it can spin and how much power it can actually generate. And Kein, Anderer, and Ben Bingo built a dyno that can do that. It uses a scriptable mod. It's unbelievable. This thing even gives us power curves, and it's actually amazing. It's really, really cool. So we're gonna hook up all the different motors, and we're gonna compare them to my really terrible piston engine. But anyway, what is torque? A lot of people talk about torque and horsepower and cars, and we don't ever really talk about what torque is. So if you don't know what torque is really calculated as the force times the distance away from the rotation point. So if we look here, we've got a rotation point. I'm actually gonna twist this way now. And if I remove the lift, you can see one electric engine powered. So this thing is generating power. We can crank it up to max, it doesn't matter. The torque of the engine doesn't change with the speed. And you can see it can hold at a 10 block distance. It's not actually 1668, it's this block here. It's 1518 block units of weight. So Scrap Mechanic doesn't really use real units. The guys who made this mod, they have real units on there, like horsepower and foot-pounds of torque. So I don't know how they're converting it, what they're using to convert the mass and stuff. But realistically, if we were to calculate it, you can see it's ever so slightly gaining on it. And eventually, as soon as it passes the threshold, the sine theta becomes less and it'll crank this over. But let's say, you know, roughly 15, 18 blocks of weight, 10 blocks out. That means this motor would produce 15, 18 block units of force, you know, multiplied by 10 blocks. So it would be like 15,180 block units. It's all made up units, guys. But if this was pounds, it would be 18 pounds of force over a distance of 10 feet. So it'd be 15,110 pounds or whatever, 180 pound foot of torque is how that would work. It's a pretty simple calculation. And then to convert to horsepower, horsepower is just equal to torque times RPM divided by 5252 if the torque is in pound feet. You can see now that the weight has been lifted slightly, the torque stays the same, but because the angle gets less and less and less, it requires less torque to push it, right? Because the amount of weight is no longer normal. Makes sense. If you try and hold your arm out and you hold a weight at the very end of your arm, it's really, really tough to do. But if you hold that same weight straight up, it's really easy to do because, you know, you're not having to torque your elbow against it, right? You can actually just hold that weight perfectly above you. And now you'll see we won't be able to get this in the opposite direction until we kick it a little bit past that point. So the torque stays the same, but of course the mass is, you know, the amount of mass that's affecting the force changes. The mass is the same, but the force vector, it reduces, right? As the sine of the angle of the, you know, like, right? Like force angle, it makes sense, right? So anyway, this dyno basically measures that. And what this dyno does, it's really, really smart. These guys are actually really, like, this is brilliant stuff. I mean, the fact that they used a scripted mod is amazing. And this is like a touch screen we can interact with, which is just even better. But what the dyno does is it essentially uses a smart motor from the mod pack and a bunch of, like, I don't know what these sensors are doing, but something. And essentially they're using a script with a PID written into the script to adjust the amount of load on the torque here, on this like feed member, until it gets to an RPM value of 0. And when the RPM value gets to 0, if you know exactly how much load you're putting on it, then you can calculate how much torque that is, right? Because you've basically put a counter torque against the bearing, and if you know how much counter torque you're applying, then therefore you know how much power that generated, how much torque it was, and you know the RPM. So all they're measuring is the RPM, they're measuring that counter torque, and they're doing the math to calculate the horsepower. This is some brilliant, brilliant stuff. Like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in Scrap Mechanic, and I'm gonna use this all the freaking time to calculate torque on any engine I make. So let's start off with like the most basic example. So really quickly, we can just slap a bearing on this, right? And we can drop this down, and there we go. So now that's a bearing that we can power with whatever the heck we want. So let's start with an electric engine, right? And we can crank this thing up. Let's put it on a little bit of rotation. And now if we reset, you can see we've got an average speed of 4 RPM, right? So let's crank this up to max. Now we just showed in that the torque is constant. Doesn't matter what RPM it is, we should get the same torque curve. And we'll actually test that because that would be a cool thing. So let's crank it up to max RPM. And let's let it, you know, catch up. So it's spinning that at max RPM, 1164 RPM. So now let's hit start. Now when we hit start, this machine's gonna apply a load against this motor until that motor gets to 0. So we're gonna see the curve surge up and then drop down. and at some point, it'll hit a maximum torque value, and that's the value of the load on this that it's using to stop the engine, basically. So let's just hit start. This is gonna be wicked cool. There go the curves. And there's our torque. So you can see that blue line that flattens out. At this point, you can see the RPM goes up and up and up. RPM would be like on our x-axis. This would be our power and horsepower. But you can see the RPM goes to down, down, down. And then at maximum power, this is the maximum power point, which would be at some RPM value. And then all of a sudden, as we go down to 0, you can see once the torque gets past the point that the motor can't rotate it anymore, which is the, you know, the peak torque. Actually, we should switch this to max torque. They're 1280. So that's that little blip there. But once the motor applies 1280 Newton meters of torque, it can't actually, you know, oppose it and blah, blah, blah. It's actually kind of cool that it uses Newton meters. 122 horsepower, 1280 Newton meters with a speed at peak power of 877 RPM. So there you go. At that point, we're gonna generate all this maximum stuff. Again, I don't know how they're calculating Newton meters. I've been told that one block in Scrap Mechanic is 0.25 meters, like 1/4 of a meter is one block, but I don't know what the weight units are. Everything in Scrap Mechanic has a weight, and I actually went into the game files to look, but they just call it a density value, and they just say density 5, for example, for this block, or like concrete would be, I think, density 7, and I don't really know how that calculates. I'd be curious if, you know, Kein, Anderer, or Ben Bingo would like to disclose what they use for weights. I would be very curious, because of course, we do have the mod pack mass thing, which measures the total weight of a creation, but it outputs it in just numbers, and I don't know what these numbers mean either. It just says literally, it's just the mass. And this is 1518 mass units. So like, you know, I don't know how they're converting that to Newton meters. But anyway, pretty cool stuff. Again, let's try this again. Let's crank the motor down to half speed, and we should get the same peak torque result at different RPM, but we should get the same peak torque result. So let's just reset this, right? What's our, oh, I guess that resets everything. That's fine. What's our average current speed? There we go. Let's go current speed. 64 RPM. That's interesting. I don't know if this is gonna work the way it's supposed to, but I guess we'll find out. Let's go start this up. Current speed. The curves are way back because the X scale for RPM is just terrible, apparently. And there you go. And there's the peak. That's unbelievable. Max power is only 8 horsepower because, again, we don't have RPM, right? Torque stays the same. Max power goes down like crazy. Horsepower, because horsepower is based on RPM. You can see only 64 RPM. That's why this graph is kind of messed up. I don't know if how their X scaling works. We are going to put a gas engine in there next. Let's just reset it again at max power. This is the coolest thing ever. I can't wait to put a piston engine in and see how terrible it is. 1022 is what I got. To see 1280, that's interesting. Because if we look at it just with an actual weight, right? Like here we've got an actual weight just still floating there. And the power, see the torque output stays the same. But the dyno shows different. That's interesting. I don't know what the deal is with that. This shows 1280, a lot higher. Anyway, something to, you know, pay attention to. It's not really a huge deal. The other thing we can do, of course, is we can take this and we can double it up. Amazing, right? All right, perfect. There we go. So average RPM, 1164. Let's hit that start button. It should generate twice as much torque, 2,000 something, right? Yeah, 2,158 Newton meters of torque. That's actually ridiculous that works. All right, so let's do one more with just a single electric engine in this setup. Let's do it at max power, and let's just do a quick run here to really compare it to the overall of a gas engine. So max power, max torque, speed at peak power, 881, 1321. That number went up, interestingly enough, with this configuration. I wonder if that's because we have some extra weight here going on. But either way, 1321-ish, 140, whatever, doesn't matter. You know, 1321, 140 horsepower, right? So let's try a gas engine now. Let's just crank this bad boy up. Same setup, one gas engine. And let's reset this boy. So here we go. 706 RPM so far. Oh my God. Are you serious? A gas engine generates 7,000 Newton meters of torque? There's no way that's real. There's no way it's like 7-fold better than an electric engine. Are you serious? 7,000 is what? Holy cow, the gas engines are overpowered. All right, well, that's very, very interesting. There's no way. I mean, I'm gonna keep running it and getting the same results. Apparently 7,000 RPM of torque. Or 7,000 Newton meters. That is insane. Oh my God, that's so powerful. Why is that so good? It's not some glitch in the matrix, right? Like it's for real. That's a for real number? This thing is so cool, by the way. I could run it all day and not even matter. Like, this is 1321. It's so much less. An electric engine is actually terrible. The gas engine is overpowered. All right, the gas engine in Scrap Mechanic is apparently a 700 horsepower, like 3,000 Newton meter torque monster. Alrighty, well that's cool. The only other thing to check, of course, is a controller, because a looped controller on 360 degrees has some power, in fact. So let's just hook this up to a switch real quick and try this guy out. This is, okay, that doesn't have a lot of RPM. Let's reset this guy to 0. Let's clear the board. Average speed. Yeah, the RPM on this thing is not good. 60 RPM. All right, I didn't actually check the average speed of the gas engine. I'll have to do that. It's probably really, really high. What's the max torque on this guy? It's gonna be high. Controllers can push through a lot of nonsense. 1,000, it's just slow. It's just super slowly grinding its way up. This is the dyno basically applying more and more weight and resistance against the actual thing until it completely stalls out. I have no idea how dynos work in real life. I imagine they use some sort of resistance, but like, you can't stop a car because you'd stall the engine out, right? So I don't know how the dyno in real life actually calculates the torque. I've never really looked into it, to be honest. But this is ridiculous. Oh my God, 4,000, okay, so 4,000 Newton meters of torque is where a controller just hits its limit. Only 33 horsepower, but that's the torque difference. That's so crazy to me that gas engines are the most efficient. I can't believe gas engines have 700 horsepower. But again, they have like a crazy high RPM. If we reset this, the RPM on this is gonna be stupid. Right? 706, oh no, it's not. Wow, they're just, okay, gas engines are just OP. So an electric engine spins faster, but a gas engine has, that's just ridiculous. This is so cool. But of course, we all want to know how good my terrible 3-cylinder piston engine is. I have other piston engines as well. I've got a lot of piston engines. This is a piston engine V4. This seems bad. We're gonna, you know, we're gonna try this one. This is the standard 3-cylinder. This is the one that I built in survival. Everybody hates. It's not very good. I have another one as well, which is really, really old, but it's a radial. It's a 4-cylinder radial. And, I hope this still works. It does. So this is an engine that has 4, pistons all 90 degrees offset from each other, and it rotates that center crank. And you can see they all get told what position to go to based on... So let's hook this guy up as well. Again, I don't know how good this is with the current times, but it's a radial engine. It pushes that center plus around, and, theoretically it generates a lot of torque. I don't know. We'll find out, but let's hook this guy up first. I don't even think I'm gonna come close to, like, anything. A gas engine, a controller, nothing. All right, and then of course we gotta take this and attach it to this. And then just for the sake of not losing any torque in the creation itself, we should weld this whole thing to the ground, because we don't want the creation accidentally torquing against the dyno and trying to like lift the dyno up off the ground or something like that. So let's just weld the whole thing. All right, and fire it up. Okay. This is the default settings I have it at. Let me see if I crank these up to fast, because apparently pistons go better if they're fast. And I've been told these should be at a distance of 2, even though I like using it in excess. There we go. Okay, so it's got a skip point because, of course, my timing sucks. People have been telling me I need to use controllers on my timing wheels to, like, slightly adjust the angle, and we're really gonna have to play with that. But I'm hoping this dyno will give us a nice ability to do that. Look at that, 200 RPM. Let's go. We get something out of it. It goes 200 RPM. I should, you know what? I should try it at the default first and then crank it up. It was default like 3s, right? Which was just terrible. The default's half that, 100 RPM. All right, let's run it through the torque test. Here we go. Start. I love how the curve now actually shows the individual points it's calculating. 655 Newton meters of torque. Okay. Okay, how much horsepower did we generate? We're 0 horsepower now. Speed at peak power is 85 RPMs. We lost like 15%. 680 Newton meters of torque. Can I change it to pound feet? 501 pound feet of torque. Let's go. It's 7 horsepower. Oh yeah, this thing's a monster. This thing's a monster. It's got such power. Oh, amazing. So much wow. This thing is just, it's a dominant machine. That's great. I can't believe it goes 200 RPM though. All right, so let's crank this up. 200 RPM. This should technically, if the torque is the same, because the torque is generated based on the piston dimensions, which I think it would be, we should get relatively similar torque at 700, but the horsepower should go up because now our RPM has gone up, right? So our RPM is now 200, and so we should see a higher speed at peak power, and we should also see a higher peak power in general. There we go, 14 horsepower, and because we've doubled our RPM, we almost doubled our horsepower, and a little bit more torque, 842 Newton meters of torque. That's great. That's fantastic. I love this. This thing is amazing. All right, let's hook up the Radial. I'm curious. I think the Radial is gonna be a beast. I don't know. I feel like it's gonna be a beast. That was 800 Newton meters of torque. This thing, I don't know. I have no idea what the difference is. I'm gonna have to make a spreadsheet, and I'm gonna have to start like recording all the values of all my engines and seeing which one can do what. This one I think is already, yeah, it's already maxed out. And I'm pretty sure they have to, you can see this is a much smoother engine than my piston ones. Again, the timing on my piston ones is off. You see the timing wheel on this Radial one is much better. It's a little bit of an offset dealio. 166 RPM, so a little bit slower than the three piston guys. So it might have a little less horsepower. But the other one was like what, 800 Newton meters of torque and 14 horsepower. So let's see what this guy does. 166, 150, 140. Okay, so it's stalled out. 960, 994 Newton meters of torque and 1,000 Newton meters of torque at 16 horsepower. So right off the bat, it's better. It gets more power and more torque. I mean, it would get more power because more torque and power are related. That's awesome. It actually generates more power as a Radial. Well, it's interesting. I learned some things about gas engines today and controllers. I mean, controllers are OP. We all knew that. They spin slow. They do a lot of damage. Kind of insane. Gas engines, most powerful engine in the game, apparently, just based on straight everything. Never would have thought that for a million years, but apparently this thing is still just going. Is it like, I think this is physics glitching the engine out. Like, I think it's, you can see it just keeps spiking. 1,300. Is that, you can finally get a stop? No, you're just gonna keep powering through it. That's nuts. I don't know, I feel like there's a physics glitch going on here. 1321, it's just gonna keep applying load until eventually it stops it. But yeah, it's crazy that the gas engines are the most powerful thing in the game. Would not have expected that. I'm gonna have to record all these values into a spreadsheet for future experimental purposes. Definitely gonna be useful when we're making engines and stuff, and you know, really being able to go through and calculate how our engines are gonna work. And really, you know what? There's one more thing we should do. I lied. Okay, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna do one more really cool experiment. Okay, we're gonna take an electric engine. Let's do a gas engine first. I just wanna verify my hypothesis. Right, that thing spins up to stupid speeds, and we start it. More power, more torque. Yeah, more torque than. That's insane. 7,000 Newton meters of torque. I want to do the ever famous test. Let's take an electric engine. Let's hook it up to this. Let's put it at half power, right? And that way we'll spin at half power. Not super fast, but you know, like, I don't know, like 100 RPM or something. 64 RPM, perfect. And we're just going to do one simple test. And it's a pretty easy test. We're going to let that run, of course. And then we're going to want to grab this Tremel gear. And theoretically, if we weld this in between, we should double our torque and half our RPM, right? I mean, that's what the physics says. Of course, there's going to be slip and stuff in scrap mechanics, so I don't know how that's going to play in. 1,023 Newton meters of torque, 64 RPM at peak power. So now we can just weld this in between. This is just ridiculously cool that this actually works. And we want to weld it this way. So, yeah, perfect. Hopefully this actually lets me... Yeah, it's the right way. Excellent. All right, we'll do this. Done. And then, really, we don't actually have to add another bearing onto it. We can just attach the electric motor here and power, like, you know, either of these. Really, it doesn't matter. So let's go back up to half again, right? And we should be at average speed 40 RPM, 50 RPM, less than we were. There we were here, right? Yeah, that's better. 35 RPM, that's right. And now it should generate twice as much torque. Should be almost 2,000 torque. I don't know if this is gonna, there's gonna be slip, so there's gonna be collisions happening here, obviously, between the Tremel and the gear itself. I don't know if it's gonna be, well, we're passing the 1,000 mark and it's still spinning. It's only generating 5 horsepower though, because it's only going 32 RPM. Like, this is 32 RPM at the exit shaft, obviously, right? We've got, you know, at the crank you're there, and at the exit you're here. case people were wondering horsepower at the crank versus, oh God, 2,000, look at that, it actually works. 2,000 Newton meters of torque, 8 horsepower, 31 RPM. That's amazing. Well, anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Kudos to the guys who made this. It's absolutely amazing. It blows my mind, and I'm going to use it all the time. I need to do some real piston engine R&D to make some better piston engines, and now we'll actually be able to measure them. And the cool thing is, we should be able to measure piston engines with, you know, different torque and horsepower characteristics. I think in Scrap Mechanic, everything's always going to be a little bit more torqueier than it is power related, because power means you need a high RPM. So if we were to really wanted a high horsepower, low torque engine, we need a really, really high RPM that it runs at. So if we had an engine that ran at like 10,000 RPM, but only generated like 20 Newton meters of torque, that would generate a lot of horsepower, but wouldn't generate a lot of a torque, obviously, right? So I don't think we can really do that in Scrap Mechanic. I think just the way pistons and stuff are, they're naturally going to generate a lot of power. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Obviously, the size of the crank matters. If we put the piston further out, we'll generate more torque per piston. If we put the pistons closer, we'll generate less torque, theoretically more RPM, more power. This is just ridiculously cool. And yeah, I'm gonna calculate a lot of different engines on this setup. So we're gonna do some experimenting, and we can check differential setups, we can check transmission setups, we can even check differential losses. We could lock the one side of a differential and see how much the differential loses from the crank RPM measurement versus going through the differential and coming out here, and there's gonna be like a loss there that happens due to friction and stuff. So we can calculate all that with this, you know, and it's just really, really cool stuff. So let me know what you guys think. I'm so happy that there's a dyno, and I can't believe that there's a scriptable parts mod that lets you actually set this kind of thing up. So really cool stuff. Let me know what other kind of builds you guys want to see, and of course, I'll put a workshop link for this dyno down in the description because it's absolutely amazing. So, you know, like, subscribe. Let's see y'all next time.